The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Grounded for now, the government delays its decision on whether to approve a second runway at Gatwick. The tech giant Nvidia sees revenues jump by nearly 80% as AI chip sales soar. Plus, gearing up for a summer of live music, why festivals are expected to give the UK economy a £6 billion boost this year. Very good morning on this Thursday Business Live. With me, Darren McCaffrey. Well, the government has delayed a major decision on the expansion of Gatwick Airport this morning, but it has said it is minded to approve the use of its standby runway as an additional permanent runway. Gatwick is the busiest single runway airport in the UK. I think it might be actually in the world, and the expansion would enable it to deal with around 100,000 extra flights a year. That would mean the airport could handle, in total, more than 380,000 flights per year. The report says the expansion would create around 14,000 new jobs and inject an extra £1 billion into the region's economy every year. Well, in practical terms, the airport says construction could start as soon as it's given the green light. It started this year. It could be completed and ready for operation by the end of the decade. To bring the emergency runway into regular use would mean moving it by 12 metres to bring it into line with international safety standards. Well, let's speak to Paul Kelso, who is at Gatwick for us this morning. Very good morning to you, Paul. Just talk us through what has held this up, because the expectation this morning was that it was going to be given the green light.
Yes, we know the government is in favour of airport expansion. We've heard the Chancellor talk about it in the context of Heathrow Airport. They believe it's part of this growth strategy. Gatwick was quite confident it would get a decision today. It perhaps wasn't expecting the caveat of this delay to a final decision. But we can be very clear about what the government wants to do. The Secretary of State, so she is minded, this is Heidi Alexander, minded to approve this expansion. A government source has told me this sends a very clear message that the government will stop at nothing. In other words, it chooses to deliver growth. They called it a victory for holiday makers. That's the easy bit. The difficult bit is just squaring off the areas that remain contentious. I'll try and keep this as simple as possible. This is a first in planning law. Gatwick put in a plan for this airport, for this runway expansion, which the planning inspectorate rejected. But the planning inspectorate itself, in view of the Gatwick's desire for a new runway and the government support, has put in an alternative proposal, effectively, to Gatwick to work on. And it is that alternative that, if Gatwick can deal with the outstanding areas, the Secretary of State will approve. Those areas are broadly noise, the additional noise pollution, how that can be mitigated for people who live locally, and transport. They want more than 50% of people to arrive by public transport for the new runway to be in use. So those are the areas that are still outstanding. And talking to government sources, they say that this delay, while not ideal, is the best that could be expected at the moment, because the alternative would be, without this second plan, the Secretary of State would have to either reject Gatwick's proposal out of hand, and there would be no second runway, definitely, or she would have to overturn the planning inspectorate, and that, of course, leaves them, in the words of what one person described as, staggeringly vulnerable to legal challenge. So we have this delay, but there is a clear commitment from government to try and make this happen. We've just had a statement from Gatwick's chief executive welcoming this step. Their issue is looking at these mitigations around noise and transport. Is this still an investable plan? Because this will be a £2 billion project of private money.
And this is different from Heathrow, isn't it, Paul, in the sense that the runway is already there effectively, so it's not nearly as much as construction as you might expect. If, and it is an if, of course, Gatwick decides to go ahead with this, when are we looking at potentially this runway being actually in use? What's the timescale here?
Well, Gatwick has said they would like to, once they've got the green light, they can get working, they were saying, by the end of the year. I'll get a chance to talk to the chief executive in the next hour, and we can find out how this 9-month potential delay. The decision could come sooner should these issues be resolved. How that will affect the timescale. They'd like to be moving planes in and out of here by the end of the decade, is my understanding. It is, we talk about moving a runway 12 metres. You can't just pick it up and move it, of course. It's effectively building a new one. So it is a major project, but it doesn't have the complexity, you're right, of Heathrow, where the M25 is going to have to be moved into a tunnel, which is an enormous project that will take decades, a decade perhaps, not years. So they expect to be able to get on with this quite quickly. They will still have to deal with objections. Just very quickly, a bit of reaction. Greenpeace have said by approving Gatwick's expansion, the government will hang a millstone the size of a 747 round the country's neck. The only thing it's set to boost is air pollution, noise and climate emissions. Interestingly, the local opposition group, the Campaign Against Gatwick Noise and Emissions, they've welcomed the extension by the Secretary of State, they say, as she has obviously recognised the many holes in the Gatwick Airport's submissions. That is not the government's position, but clearly objectors see an opportunity to explore every legal avenue here to try and delay and ultimately prevent this expansion. And that, of course, I think is one of the major reasons why the government is granting this extra time to try and have this, what is a first in major planning projects, have this actually reach fruition without legal challenge. There'll probably be legal challenge, but without a challenge that will prevent it happening.
OK, Paul, I think also a reminder for the government that even decisions that seem relatively straightforward not necessarily are. Paul Kelso there live for us at Gatwick. Thank you very much. Let's turn to football now, because some of the biggest name in football finance are gathering in central London today for the FT's Business of Football Summit. Among the discussions were concerns about the prospect of a football regulator that's proved pretty controversial. Let's speak to Rob Harris, who joined us from that conference in central London. Rob, just talk us through, these are kind of government proposals, aren't they? And let's be honest about this, at best they've had somewhat of a mixed reaction, this idea of a regulator.
Yes, it seems that Premier League clubs are really stepping up their attacks on these plans for an independent regulator. This government inherited the plans from the previous Conservative government, although very recently the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch saying it would be a waste of money now introducing this regulator into English men's football, and it comes with the Premier League warning of unintended consequences for the competitiveness and excitement of the competition. And here at this FT Business of Football Summit, the Crystal Palace chairman has been talking about complete paralysis in the game at the moment. This really relates to things on two fronts: the fears of the football regulator coming into play, having jurisdiction over financial regulations, being able to, as they would see it, interfere with that, also to be able to potentially interfere with the distribution of finances from the Premier League down to the lower leagues. But above all, it's the amount of legal challenges the Premier League are facing at the moment. And this is an internal battle. The Premier League is fighting its champions, Manchester City, on multiple fronts. They've been dragged into arbitration hearings over financial rules. And, you know, we've heard Steve Parish saying that it's very questionable. Why is their football being dragged into courts like this, the rules being analysed and scrutinised to the nth degree? He was saying that, you know, that's an issue, that football's constantly being told it's not a normal business, that it's the fabric of communities, but why is it treated like a normal business in these legal settings? But it is Manchester City who have gone to the arbitration process to challenge these rules that limit how much they can spend on players. Can they inflate, as it's accused, the sponsorship that they bring in from companies linked to their Abu Dhabi owners? They've had a recent big success against the profit and sustainability rules relating to associated party transactions, but those rules are being reformulated amidst these battles. But above all, the big thing that the whole of football is really waiting for is the outcome of a huge Premier League case, more than 100 charges of alleged wrongdoing that Manchester City are accused of, going back to 2009, about whether they in any way disguised the source of income, had payments off the books in some way, all in an attempt to comply with the financial regulations, effectively to suppress their outgoings and raising their incomings, because clubs are only allowed to spend legitimate income. We're awaiting the outcome of that case, and at 12 o'clock, live on Sky News, online platforms, YouTube and on our app, a Q&A, your questions answered. The Premier League hearing into Manchester City finished in December. Why we're still awaiting the outcome? What will the outcome potentially be? Could it be a huge punishment for Manchester City? So an attempt to answer some of your questions on that.
Rob, even getting a plug in there midday. Thank you very much indeed, Rob Harris, for us in central London at that football summit. Now, new data suggests that price gap between flats and houses has reached a 30-year high as buyers favour buying actual houses. According to Zoopla's latest price index, the average house value is £319,500. That's 67% higher than the average value of a flat, which is only £191,300. Let's speak to Richard Donald. He is Zoopla's Executive Director. Very good morning to you, Richard. Is this a simple case? And I say this purely anecdotally. I live in East London. There's a hell of a lot of flats being built, not many houses. Is this a supply and demand issue, if you like?
I think it's a real choice issue. I think ever since the pandemic really drove this search for space, we've really seen house values kick on much faster than flats. I think the flats market's been held back by concerns over the leasehold tenure, ground rent, service charges, and obviously the Grenfell tragedy, we had concerns over building safety. So buyers are just more circumspect about buying flats versus houses. And, outside London, more than half of first-time buyers still want to buy a three-bed house. They're skipping over the flats market.
But I also, am I not right in saying that there are just essentially more apartments on the market in that they are being built, or is that wrong?
No, look, I think we've got about 20% of homes for sale on Zoopla at the moment are flats. There's more of a concentration in London and in Scotland. They're a bigger part of the housing market. I think outside London, Scotland, houses are really the majority kind of type of property in the market, basically. So, yeah, you get regional variations, but the gap is still there. And actually in London, the difference between a flat and a house is even bigger than the national average.
And what impact does this have, if you like, Richard, on the thought process about what to build next? This is a government that wants to build 1.5 million homes. Now, a home can be a flat, it can be an actual house. Will construction companies, will governments be looking at potentially having to build more houses? And that's got a complication, in essence, because flats, particularly the high-rise flats, do take up less room.
That's right. Look, I think we need to build a balance of housing. I think, a lot of talk about building new towns. That's going to be greenfield sites. It's going to be density, but it's going to be a lot more houses than flats, probably. I think we've got to get back to building in city centres. Yes, city centres have had a lot of apartments built recently, but the vast majority of those have been bought by corporate investors to rent out. We have a kind of lack of supply of flats and smaller types properties for people to actually buy and live in. So we've got to build on brownfield sites in city centres. We've got to build on greenfield because we need to open up all the opportunities to get anywhere near the 1.5 million target.
And Richard, this is the largest gap since 1995. I think houses have gone up by 2.2%, flats only by 0.5%. Finally, if you're a bit canny and you don't really care about where you live, you could probably get a pretty good deal, could you, on an apartment?
That's right. I think, look, not all flats have got issues and challenges. I think, and again, the affordability, if you look at across all the big cities of the UK, if you bought a flat with a mortgage, it would probably cost you 40% less than the cost of renting. There's probably some opportunities out there for, as you say, canny buyers who want to get into the detail and maybe some of the complexities around leasehold and running costs. But there's going to be some great opportunities out there. Don't just write off flats and think about those if you really want to get on into home ownership quicker than waiting to buy that house.
Sound advice there, Richard. Thank you very much indeed, Richard Donald there from Zoopla. Thank you. OK, you're watching Business Live on Sky News. Coming up, we're going to be looking at how the markets are doing this morning. FTSE up a fraction. We'll have that. And also music festivals and the boom they're driving for the British economy. All up next on Business Live. Stay tuned.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over 50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Thai village on the front line.
Firing to civilian and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free, wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in Parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Flying units, fly better. Thank you.
Very welcome back. Let's have a look at those markets in a bit more detail this morning. Joining me is Emma Wall, Head of Platform Investments at Hargreaves Lansdowne. Very good morning to you, Emma. Let's start with NVIDIA. Pretty smashing last quarter. Profits soaring.
Yeah, the really interesting thing about NVIDIA is they beat expectation on both profits and revenue. And indeed, in the market session, the share price went up. But since the market has closed, we've actually seen softness in the share price. I think this really speaks to the fact that the trouble with being a straight A student who always significantly surpasses expectations, I mean, there's only one quarter where they haven't, is that everyone's expectations are extremely high, and immediately they absorb the information they've just been given and start to think about what happens next quarter and the quarter after that. And this will be the challenge for NVIDIA over the long term. Every single year now, on an annual basis, they have released, this time the Blackwell chip, a chip that significantly is an improvement on the last one, so both in terms of power and indeed efficiency. And this actually mirrors what we saw with Apple and the iPhone. For a number of years, each iPhone was a considerable jump in terms of iteration improvements, camera functionality, services. At some point, the improvements that you make to those chips, or any product and technology indeed, does start to wane. And so I think what's happened in the post-market closing is they've started immediately to look forward, although this was a good set of results.
And Emma, the interesting thing here, though, about NVIDIA in particular is obviously what DeepSeek has proven earlier on this year is that you don't actually need necessarily the chip power to continue to grow. That was taken as a given, wasn't it, not that long ago? And that also could impact NVIDIA in the long term, if you like.
Yeah, Nvidia is one of the last of the mega cap stocks to report. And what we did see from Microsoft, from Meta and from Alphabet is a promise of considerably higher capex in the future. Now, not all of that is going to flow directly to Nvidia, but you can safely assume a lot of that is going to their chip manufacturer of choice, which is Nvidia. But you're right in terms of at some point, the market says, I'm not sure we need a more powerful chip in order to do what we want to do. What's really interesting as well is if I look on our platform, our clients have started to turn off the mega caps, in part because actually of the softness that you've seen year to date of the mega caps underperforming the S&P 500. And there has been this rotation in the market actually broadening out some of those returns. And our clients are saying actually it's time to take gains. It has been a considerable run, even with the recent weakness year to date. And actually, they're rotating into other stocks such as consumer staples, defense, areas of the market, which in some cases have done well or indeed are undervalued, but they certainly haven't had the incredible run that those mega caps have.
Emma, let's talk about Rolls-Royce. It's had a pretty turbulent couple of years, actually, but despite the announcement by Gatwick today, we know that there is still such strong demand, isn't there? Particularly for flying, and they're doing well of that. I think they're saying they're going to hit their profit target 2 years early, primarily because there are a lot of people wanting a lot of planes.
Absolutely. Revenue significantly above expectations, profit significantly above expectations, free cash flow double expectations. And the market has reacted accordingly. I mean, 20% intraday rally in that share price is a very good result. I think what's really interesting also is the fact that, as you say, the majority has actually come from increased demand for flying. We're now back to pre-pandemic levels, and it's looking pretty sustained, actually. But also the news this week that Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, has committed to an increase in percentage of GDP spending on defence to 2.5% in the near term, and then rising to 3%. Now, Rolls-Royce is only 25% of its revenues and business is in defence, but it's still a sizable proportion. So also I expect that will provide some tailwind, and it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of the conversations between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, who are meeting today.
And just very finally, Emma, in the last couple of minutes, I see that BP's chief executive is saying that they want to double, essentially, the market value of BP to $200 billion within the next 5 years. And it comes obviously off the back of that announcement yesterday. This is a company, BP, massive company, but that is trying to turn its fortunes around. It's been quite a difficult 5 years, some might say, for BP.
Yeah, our analysts on the ground are quite divided about actually the new strategy yesterday. Some are saying actually it's typical of what you'd expect from a CFO turned CEO, actually that laser focus on cutting cost and investing actually into the areas which are still the most profitable, i.e. fossil fuels, oil and gas. Other analysts on my team are actually saying this is a very short-termist view, and actually the move to the carbon transition is where you need to be over the long term. So it will be interesting to see how shareholders react.
Emma, really interesting, as always. Appreciate your time this morning. Emma Wall there from Hargreaves Lansdown. Thank you. Now, we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about Ukraine and its minerals. We're going to do the same tomorrow as President Zelensky flies to the United States. But let's talk about another mission and scope for precious metals and minerals, not deep underground, but actually up in space, because a privately built probe launched on a SpaceX rocket has embarked on a special assignment to check out an asteroid's potential to yield rare elements, which, if successful, could herald a new dawn in commercial exploration. Our science correspondent, Thomas Moore, has the story.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff. Go, Falcon, go into ignition.
Odin thundered into the Florida sky, riding in a SpaceX rocket, heading out into the solar system, the first private spacecraft to venture so far. Its mission is to rendezvous with an asteroid and scout out its potential for mining. Asteroid 2022 OB5 is thought to be rich in platinum and similar metals, widely used in electronics and other critical technology. They're so valuable, the startup Astroforge says it's worth going the distance.
The problem is with Earth is that all of the good ore sources of platinum group metal we've mined. And everything we're looking at now is thousands of meters under the earth. It's actually very, very difficult to go mine on Earth. We know this exists in space. We know it's readily available. Our mission is just, instead of going down, we want to go up.
Odin should catch up with the asteroid 1 million miles from Earth, then take detailed pictures. If they look promising, another spacecraft will follow, this time landing on the surface to confirm the company has struck platinum.
The little twinkles in there, those are little bits of metal.
At the Natural History Museum in London, there are meteorites that look like lumps of metal. Mining in deep space could make sense.
Metallic asteroids are much rarer than the stony ones, but they are there. They make up quite a substantial part of our meteorite collection here at the Natural History Museum, so we know that they're out there in space, and we know that they're incredibly rich in elements like platinum, but also cobalt and nickel. They're, just a fantastic resource for many metals.
The same SpaceX rocket is also carrying a robotic moon lander called Athena that will drill into the lunar surface looking for water. As the cost of reaching space has plummeted, mining far from Earth has become economically viable, and our celestial neighbours are seen as a potential resource. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
And there you go, that was Thomas Moore reporting. Now, I did tease you a little earlier by suggesting we were going to talk about music festivals, the promoter of the Isle of Wight. He hasn't turned up this morning, but we will hopefully talk to him this afternoon because it is a booming business that apparently is generating £6 billion for the economy. I'm sure there's a lot of you at home potentially going to music festivals this summer, whether it's Reading, Glastonbury, the Isle of Wight or others. So we will talk about that a little later on. Also this afternoon, going to be talking about Gatwick, hopefully getting reaction from the chief executive of Gatwick Airport, given that decision by the government today to effectively back a second runway at Gatwick Airport, but it's providing or on a provision of reducing noise put in place. And we know that the government has talked a lot about airport expansion. It's been part of its growth plans, but a further delay, it seems, to that decision. So we will have that with Paul Kelso at 4:30 this afternoon here on Business Live. Do join me then if you can. Up next, though, it is Gareth with the rest of the day's news, including more on the death of the actor Gene. That is up next here on Sky News. Stay tuned for that. See you a bit later. Bye.